Good evening, everyone. How are we doing? I am Chris, and I'm live streaming very late. I'm live streaming just gone 12:15 in the AM, but I am fresh out the cinema from Oppenheimer, which is Christopher Nolan's latest movie, biopic depicting chronicling the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the theoretical physicist who was pivotal in the nuclear weapons race during the Manhattan Project and ushering in the atomic age. As you can tell, a very heavy going film for late on a Friday night into the early hours of Saturday morning, but nonetheless I am here to give my review on it. I don't know how long this review is going to be. I don't think it'll be particularly long, because case in point, like, this is just the history of this is almost unknown to me. I mean, obviously, I've heard of Oppenheimer. I know that he was responsible for creating the father of the atomic bomb, and honestly, that's basically where my knowledge began and end. I didn't know much about his upbringing or his life or the whole events of it, because we just never got taught that aspect of history in school, and I haven't really gone out of my own way to learn about that, which maybe I should. So I have no idea how accurate this film is. You know, as is the case with a lot of biopic films, they take artistic liberties for the sake of the film medium. This is based on a book, which obviously in turn is based on Oppenheimer's life. So the book is a 2005 biography titled American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. Again, a book I've never read. If I had have done, then maybe I'd be a bit more learned before going into this film. But it does open with almost like the parable, the mythology of Prometheus. And I love mythology, and I think that it's actually a very accurate depiction. A very accurate comparison of calling him the American Prometheus, because he very much is, stealing fire from the gods, giving it to the people, and being tortured and punished for it basically for the rest of his life. Very interesting comparison there, definitely. Christopher Nolan, I mean, goddamn, like, where do you even start with his films? He's had some fantastic films. A lot of his films are very good, in my opinion. Tenet, I enjoyed. I watched multiple times. The first time I went to see it, I didn't understand the goddamn thing about Tenet. And I think I went to see it like another two times after that, each time getting to grips with it more. But one thing I will say about Tenet is that it's light on character. A lot of Christopher Nolan's films... Oh, God, I'm losing my voice. Hang on. Blah, blah, blah. There we go. I'm back. A lot of his films have been described as being quite emotionally detached. Characters don't really talk like real people. Everything's kind of got like a very stoic, cold edge to it, and I do think that criticism is valid with some of Christopher Nolan's films, definitely. And I would say that's probably true of Tenet. His films tend to be more idea based and very intellectual in concept, and mind blowing ideas, and stories and aspects of stories that we've never seen before. But they're usually light on character and emotion, even down to the fact that with Tenet the main character is called protagonist, and we don't really get emotionally invested in any of the characters. But with this being a biopic, I was actually really interested to see if he does take that step into the more emotional realm with his characters, and some aspects he does, and others maybe not, but we'll get into it in a minute. What I do appreciate with this, though, is that the budget is really quite low. It's done on a 100 mil budget, and if you compare it to a lot of films that have come out recently that have been done on like a 300 mil budget, it's actually nice to come out of the cinema and actually really enjoy a film, and the art of filmmaking, and seeing all true cinema, really, which is usually what you always get with a Christopher Nolan film. And is the case with this one. I didn't see this on IMAX. There's been a lot of talk about that this film has used a combination, and yes, I am reading off Wikipedia now, but he always tends to do something new technology-wise, or something with IMAX. So apparently this film uses a combination... Well, it's filmed on a combination of IMAX 65mm and 65mm large format, and apparently, for the first time, I didn't know this, has filmed sections in IMAX black and white analog photography, and there are loads of parts in this movie that do use the black and white format. And I was doing a bit of reading earlier, and Christopher Nolan was explaining why he chose to do that, and the color sections tend to be from Oppenheimer's subjective view of what's going on in the world and the surroundings, whereas the black and white segments are the objective depiction of what's going on around him. So it's an interesting paradigm shift, and there's kind of a framing device in the film. If you're a fan of Christopher Nolan, you've probably come to expect the fact that the story's told in a non-linear order, and it kind of jumps around. There's a framing device, and he's not on trial, but they're kind of having somewhat of a hearing, like a debriefing kind of thing, I guess, where they're trying to paint Oppenheimer as a communist and to disavow him from the US, essentially, and bringing in loads of witnesses to either testify or, you know, to go against him. And then from there on, it periodically jumps around into his past and then will come back. And overall, you kind of paint this canvas of the film. You can follow it. The fact that it's 180 minutes, it really didn't feel like 180 minutes, at least to me. I think that it moves at a very fast pace, actually. There are some scenes that I wish it kind of would have lingered on a little bit more in many ways. Now, I know with 3 hours, you're having to depict this entire guy's life, and there's actually some aspects of the film that I thought, as I mentioned, they would dwell on longer. Probably the only thing that I've seen of Oppenheimer, and you can find this on YouTube, is his speech. It's the "I am become death," the destroyer of worlds. I've seen that speech before. It's quoted in a lot of stuff before. And I thought that we'd have a depiction of that scene. In fact, I thought that was going to be the end scene of the film. I remember watching that. I don't, probably just like the algorithms on YouTube. That clip of the real life Oppenheimer got recommended to me for some reason in my YouTube. So I ended up watching it and reading some of the comments, and people saying, "Oh, I really hope this is going to be the final scene of the film, and it's going to be depicted perfectly with Cillian Murphy." And it's actually not. That line, that quote, is in the film, but it's in a completely different context, and it's actually during a sex scene with Florence Pugh, who bears all in this film. So hey, if you want to see a bare-chested Florence Pugh, then you get your wish with this film. I don't think it was a body double. It may be. I don't know, but yeah, she holds up great. So that's worth the price of admission alone. If you want to see a flash of Florence Pugh's tits, you'll get your wish with this film. Some of those moments, though, I can't believe I'm even criticizing this, because I get to see a naked Florence Pugh. This is great. But I don't know how many of those... Some of them did feel a bit gratuitous to get the nudity in there, which is really unlike Christopher Nolan, actually. I shouldn't be complaining about this shit. I mean, genuinely, I can't remember the last time that I saw tits in a feature film. Whereas in the 80s, you know, they were just rife. They were everywhere in the 80s and 90s. But they did feel a little bit gratuitous at some points. You know, there were some bits where they were trying to be artistic. Florence Pugh basically plays a character in the film who Oppenheimer's having an affair with outside of wedlock. So he's married to Emily Blunt, but he's kind of got this weird emotional connection with Florence Pugh, where they're kind of like off again, on again, and she calls him when she really needs him for some like emotional support. She's clearly like a troubled, you know, person going through a lot, and they're kind of weird kindred spirits, but they don't want anything serious together, and they'll kind of just meet and hook up and fuck, and that'll be it. And it's during that scene I get the impression, and I mean, maybe I had a completely different read on this film, on this scene, than some of you might, but he's fucking Florence Pugh, and I get the impression, although it's never stated in the film, that he's got sort of performance issues. So she gets up, she goes over to the bookshelf, she gets this book off the shelf, and it's in Sanskrit, and she says, "Can you read this?" And he says, "Yeah, you know, I've been learning." So She straddles him, she holds the book over her tits and says, "Read it out." And he starts reading it, and then she starts getting off. So I don't know if it's just a way for her to get off in it, or if she was noticing his performance anxiety. So by him reading Sanskrit, which is the "I am death, the destroyer of worlds," it gets him in the mood again, because he's like, yeah, I'm like an ego boosting thing, that I am great, I am this, I am that, and she's playing into his vanity that way. I don't know. That's kind of how I read the scene, which is so unlike what where that quote was directly, taken from, and indeed the event where Oppenheimer read that quote. So I didn't really like that. I was kind of hoping for an actual depiction. And I know sometimes in some biopics, when it cuts to the credits, they'll show a real life video clip of Oppenheimer, of whoever it happens to be, of what the bipic's about. So I was kind of hoping to get that clip, or like an audio bite of it over the beginning of the credits, but you don't really get it. So I was a little bit that's an aspect of the film I would have liked to have seen depicted, which you don't really get. But while it just feels a lot more small scale, this film, and I really kind of appreciate that, especially when he's had films like Tenet, and before that, the Dark Knight trilogy, or Inception, or Dunkirk, whatever it happens to be, these big spectacle films where it's kind of nice to just strip it back a little bit. Seeing Christopher Nolan use aspects in black and white really harkened back to me the days of his early filmmaking, and he really, even his short films that he started with were in black and white. But you've got those huge portions of the film in Memento, which again are stylistically designed to be in black and white, which catches us up with where we are narratively in the timeline. He's used them on a few other occasions as well. But yeah, so I like the framing device in this. I like how it cut between the two of them. And as I say, it does move at a very brisk pace. There's a lot of information in this film. There's a lot of characters and people's names. When it gets really into the heart of the politics of this film, and you've got people backstabbing other people, they might refer to a character who's cropped up in a 30-second scene about 45 minutes ago. And the film will constantly show you, like, in the edit, it will cut to that scene. So I guess it does kind of give you a frame of reference, but also it doesn't really make you connect with those moments, because we may have only spent a few seconds with that character, with that person. So it's a lot of information. It's a lot of things being fired at you, and scenes are moving on, which is great for the pacing. As I say, for a 3-hour film, the pacing's great, but it's difficult to become emotionally attached to events that are happening. It again feels very disconnected, which is a thing that I mentioned at the beginning of this review, which is common with a lot of Christopher Nolan films. It feels like it's just presenting all of these facts to you. I guess, as I say, I don't know the real events, and I don't know if certain events have been truncated, or if these are all accurate, or if Christopher Nolan, because the screenplay was written by Christopher Nolan and obviously based on the book, so I don't know if he's put his own personal input into it as well, of what he believes that Oppenheimer's true intentions were, especially following the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So yeah, it does feel kind of like cold and dispassionate, which is either going to be tied to Christopher Nolan's style of filmmaking and writing, or you could compare it maybe to the complexity of Oppenheimer as a human being, in that, and within the film as well, it's very difficult to pin down what his true emotions were surrounding everything. It kind of toys with the idea as to whether he loved the attention, he loved the celebrity of what his part in the Manhattan Project was, and that he was sort of like taken in by the US and lauded as a hero. He was on the front of magazines. He was the father of the atomic bomb. So one of the greatest scientific minds in the world being lauded with all of this attention, and almost in many ways kind of being the savior of the US. And then so we get that aspect to him, and it kind of doesn't give you a clear-cut answer in the film as to what he thinks, as to well, did he do it for the celebrity? Was that an aspect of it, or is it the deep regret of creating this thing, and maybe starting out in the scientific field for wanting to do good and believing that he was doing right by his country, and then ultimately being a puppet by the US government, being completely blacklisted and disregarded, called a traitor, backstabbed by everyone around him, and torn down. They used him for what they needed for the political gain at the time, for the geopolitical situation, and then they disavow him and cast him to the side once they've used him. And is he a sympathetic man? Does he hold a lot of haunted, deep regret for what he did? And it toes the line between those two. And there's actually a fantastic scene in the film. It's probably my favourite scene in the film. And this is another thing I was going to say as well. I guess kind of spoilers, but you guys probably know what happened in history, or at least the Cliff Notes version, like I did. They dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I was surprised about this, is that you don't see the explosion. There's no sort of real life footage, or they don't try and recreate it. And I thought that was going to be it sounds kind of fucked up, but I thought that was going to be like a big show-stopping scene in the film, and it's not. And I actually think that it was the right decision not to show it, because we all know what happened. Maybe some of you have seen images of some of the victims, or at least victims in similar kinds of attacks. So our minds can go to those places. We know what happened and the devastating effects of the dropping of that bomb. Some could argue that it ended a war. Some argue that there wasn't even a war continuing really at that point to begin with. They could have gone about it in many different ways. Was it a deterrent? Did it just make things worse? And I'll get to that, because that's kind of where the film rounds off at the end, leaving us with that question. And he's, everyone's in jubilation in the US. Everyone's celebrating. The war's over. USA, woo, America, typical American style. And it's at the is it Los Alamos? I think it is. If I've got that right, I'm trying to remember the names of places. And he's brought forth because he's the director of the project to lead a talk, to lend some words to the situation after the dropping of the bomb. And all the crowd's going nuts. Everyone's loving it. Everyone's hanging on his every word. And the use of sound in this film is fantastic. There are some moments in the film where it kind of does fall into the sort of like Inception, Dark Knight Rises onward sound problem that Christopher Nolan always tends to have. I think it was from the Dark Knight Rises, really, where the talking is very low in the mix, the vocals, and then all the sound effects and music are like over the top, and you really can't hear what's being said. Dunkirk suffered with that a lot, but there wasn't really much dialogue in Dunkirk. Tenet really suffered for that, and I actually think they went back in post and fixed some of that for some later distributions, because the first time that I saw Tenet, I could genuinely, I probably made out about 5% of the dialogue in that film, and it's already a very complex film to try and understand, and when you can't hear a single word that people are saying, it made it damn near impossible. But then when I went to see it on subsequent viewings, maybe it was a sound system issue, but the talking seemed like it had been raised up ever so slightly in the mix, so it did make me wonder, actually. Anyway, he's leading this talk, and it almost seems like his very reality is coming apart. Everything's wavy. He's almost like seeing the electrons and the neutrons and whatever's going on all around him, and the fabric of everything breaking apart. This is after he realizes what has happened and how everyone's loving it and everyone's lauding him as the savior of the US, when he knows that this horrific act has just taken place. And the stomping of the audience's feet as well it almost sounds like a moving train. It almost feels like this mounting pressure of a bomb, which was used in the trailer as well. And he's delivering this speech, and he says, I bet that hurt Japan or something, or oh, my only regret is that we didn't get to drop it on Germany, you know, and kill us some Nazis. And he's saying this, and you can tell he's just delivering this speech as to what the people want to hear, and everyone's loving it. And then the sound cuts out from the audience, and you can just sort of hear every other sound in that room, like the scuffling of chairs and the shuffling of feet, but you can't hear the applause, you can't hear the talking. And then he starts seeing these horrific images, and there's one moment, it's not like a whole massive scream of, you know, thousands of people screaming out in terror and pain and dying. It's one woman's scream. It sounds like a young girl. It's one girl's scream, and it was so chilling to hear that. Just one. You don't even see the girl, but you just hear a scream, and then it's cut short. And then it's almost like Sarah Connor's dream sequence from Terminator 2, where the nukes go off and the blast radius hits everyone, and all their skin's peeling and burning, and the lights are getting brighter, and he just sees the whole audience disintegrate. And it was such an impactful scene. That's probably my favourite scene in the film, I would say. That or the Trinity test, because I really love the mounting tension of that scene, and again the use of sound and the anticipation for it, and the lead up to it's really well handled and fantastic. So there are moments of greatness in this film. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a solid film. I think it's a solid biopic. As I mentioned, it feels like we are cliff noting the events and rushing through as much information as we can. And there are moments where my favourite moments in the film were moments where they really took their time with the Trinity test. They really took their time with him coming to terms. That speech I just mentioned in the sort of like village hall or church, wherever they had set up, where he's delivering this speech. Those were my favourite bits, where the film kind of pulled back and got more into the artistic realm, I guess, in terms of its sound, and it's you really saw that filmmaking come through. Other times we're just cut into sort of boardroom inquests and hearings and very, very quick conversations of people in rooms. And I won't say that's where it lost me, because I really enjoyed this film and I was hanging on every word, but it was a lot of trying to keep up with things for me, and it did feel like it was sort of like cold, hard facts just being thrown at you. And I liked the more introspective moments, and I kind of wish we'd have got a few more of those. Maybe that would have been nice, but as I say, it's already at 3 hours, so what more could I ask for, I suppose. It is a very heavy-going film, intense. It's little on humour, which obviously it needs to be given the subject matter, but it also does kind of feel like it is Christopher Nolan's style, that it is quite cold and humourless most of the time. I'd love to see Christopher Nolan try and direct a comedy. I'd love to see what that would turn out like. The music's worth noting as well. So we've got Ludwig Göransson doing the music again, following Tenet. I'm guessing this is still because Hans Zimmer's tied with Dune and is doing the music for Dune, because I know that's why he didn't do the music for Tenet, is because it clashed with Dune Part 1. So with Dune Part 2 coming out this year, I don't know if Hans Zimmer had already done all the music, or if again the reason that he didn't do the music for this was because he was working on that, or maybe Nolan has just fancied a change now and thought, you know, Göransson's going to be my new composer. The score itself, as is the case with Christopher Nolan's last few films, the music isn't really a foot tapper. It serves the film well, and it serves as kind of like an ambience to the film throughout, especially like the Dunkirk soundtrack, where it's kind of just industrial noise for most of the film. It works for the film, and that kind of like ticking, that like constant tension that's going through. It works, but it's not a soundtrack that I'd sort of listen to in isolation. And it's kind of the case with this one as well. The score feels like it's got a mix of electronic, which is used effectively when they're dealing with the nuclear side of things, and it almost feels like it's this grandiose, it almost like the Interstellar soundtrack, where you had the vastness of space and the wonders of it. You kind of have like the wonders of science with this electronic score that's fed through, but predominantly it feels like the sound of this score, and for Oppenheimer, is the violin. And you do have a full orchestra in the film, of course you do, but it felt like there was this first violin above the rest of the mix all the way throughout. And there's moments where this violin weaves kind of a very, idyllic, romanticized, beautiful melody, really, for Oppenheimer's character. But there's a lot of discord in it as well, and staccato notes and jumping around. It feels really uneasy and tension filled, and that's probably sort of in the mind of what Oppenheimer would be like, how he's torn between serving his country, believing he did the right thing, and then ultimately regretting his decision and carrying a lot of that trauma with him as well. And it feels very disjointed and uncomfortable to listen to. When the tension ramps up, when we're gearing for that Trinity test, the music's ramping up, doing exactly what Christopher Nolan films do. Sometimes the music did get a little bit, I won't say obnoxious, but overpowered the rest of what was going on in the scene, like the dialogue and things like that. So sometimes I'm like, I wish they'd back the music off. I don't think it's as memorable as some of the other scores that, Ludwig Göransson's done, or even if we're comparing it to like the Hans Zimmer scores and everything in Nolan's previous films. But it felt like a solid soundtrack throughout, and the very fact that I was noticing elements like the strings, like that, that violin, that first violin that was cutting through everything. It's interesting. Maybe it is one that I should check out on its own, because there were some bits where it was really coming through and I was noticing the music more. But I was kind of swept up in the screenplay and the facts and trying to digest everything and keep track of all the characters and the events that are happening. And I'm probably sure that I missed loads of stuff that I need to watch again. In terms of how it stacks up against Christopher Nolan's other movies, I don't think this is going to have the rewatchability of a lot of the other ones. Now I've seen this film, I don't know when I'd ever rush back and watch it again. It's not a bad film by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it's a very good film. And considering the ilk of films that we've had this year, it's nice to actually go and see a film that's made by a competent director who loves cinema and loves films. And the ending of this film is really interesting as well. Just the question that the aftermath of creating something like that, what that does to the world and continues to do in the world. And it's interesting that this is coming out now, especially with everything that's been, brewing over the last few years and whatnot. And not even just for the last few years, but it's never really gone away, has it? Really, the threat of we've got a bigger missile than you, we're going to drop it on you, or not before we've built a bigger bomb and drop it on you. That's the world has kind of been in a constant Cold War, and they mentioned that, that's kind of his greatest legacy, is that by creating this and effectively ending a war, they began the Cold War with these deterrents being made by all of these different countries. So really good cast in this one as well. There was a lot of people that cropped up that I didn't know were going to be in this film. We got Kenneth Branagh, who shows up for a short while in the film. Matt Damon was obviously in the trailer. Emily Blunt's fantastic, she always is, absolute wifey material. Robert Downey Jr., I will say as well though, Robert Downey Jr., I need to check how old he is, because I don't think he's that old. He's only 58, but I don't know if he's going through something. I don't know if he's got like an illness, I don't want to say if he's battling cancer or something, because a lot of these celebrities really play it close to the chest, but he really doesn't look well. And I remember seeing a picture of him from a few months ago, and he looks really skinny, and like his neck's kind of doing that, saggy kind of thing that's going on with him. I hope he's okay, because he really doesn't look okay. And part of me thought, is that how his character looked in real life? Has he tried to model himself by losing a stack of weight and becoming more gaunt and older looking? Was that what the character looks like? But I don't think it is. I really hope he's okay, because even comparing him to, when he was Iron Man from a few years ago, I know he lost weight for Endgame, but that's kind of because he was stuck in space and he was dying in space. Um, but yeah, I don't know. That was a side note. But Robert Downey Jr. is great in the film. He plays an absolute fucking son of a bitch backstabber, but he's great. Rami Malek's in the film too. I didn't realize he was in there. He gets a short role in the film, so it's a good cast. There's a lot of cast members that Christopher Nolan always likes to use. You've got as I mentioned, Cillian Murphy, Kenneth Branagh from Tenet. You've got Casey Affleck in there from Interstellar, so you'll see familiar faces crop up in there. Of course, Matt Damon as well from Interstellar. I think I'm probably going to round it off there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can talk about. I mean, I always appreciate the fact that Christopher Nolan films as much as he can without or with minimal computer generated imagery. I like that he held back on certain scenes, as I mentioned, like we didn't have to see Hiroshima. Oh, there's another scene as well where someone's delivering a talk on the devastating effects of those nuclear bombs, and he's showing pictures, he's showing slides of what happened and what those kind of attacks do to people, but you don't see them. They're out there. People can probably find them, and it's just Oppenheimer. Like he won't even look at the pictures, which you could argue, if you're going to create the bomb, at least have the guts to look and see what it does. No, he didn't hit there's a really horrible scene where he goes to meet the president of the US, who's completely detached from the situation, and he says that no one's going to remember. Do you think anyone in Hiroshima even thinks about the guy who built the bomb in the first place? No, they care about the person who dropped it, who launched it, and that was me. I hit the button, and he doesn't give a shit. So disconnected from everything. So it's an intense movie. It really does make you think, and it makes you think, was it a lesser of two evils? It's the Watchmen thing. That's predominantly what Watchmen as a graphic novel was written for. It was all about the the Cold War and the Doomsday Clock and wiping out the Earth and the atom bomb and whatnot, and the events of it. Is that is it worth killing hundreds of thousands to save millions in that act? Could you hit that button? Could you put yourself in that situation and do it? Yeah, and it really does raise those questions at the end of the film, which it leaves an impact. It certainly does leave an impact at the end of the film. So as I say, I'm not going to laud this as one of my favorite Christopher Nolan films. Maybe it is because it's a biopic and it's slightly different to a straight narrative, but it's still very well directed. It's incredibly well paced for a 3-hour film. Really didn't feel like the runtime to me. Packed theatre as well. I was actually really surprised. I think a lot of people, especially releasing the same weekend as Barbie, which I've actually heard is a really mean-spirited fucking movie, and I've heard sort of cliff notes as to what the narrative's about. I was actually kind of gung-ho to go and watch that film this weekend, and after hearing about what the message is and some of the really mean-spirited nature of what the Barbie movie is, and again the agendas that it's pushing, I actually kind of don't want to go and see that film now, which is a shame because I think the marketing for the film has been an absolute genius. I actually wanted to go and see the Barbie movie, which I can't believe I'm even saying, but I did. It looked fun. I was comparing it to, maybe it'll be like the Lego movie. And I've heard what the actual plot of the film's about and what the narrative is and what the overall message is at the end of the film, and I think it's a really detrimental, horrible fucking message for people. So I kind of don't want to go and see it or waste my time watching it because it'll put me in a bad mood. But hey, if you want to see another Chris Rants video, the Barbie movie will probably be the next one. So but let me know if you guys want me to review that film. If not, I'll probably just leave it for Oppenheimer this week. I'd say go and check this film out on IMAX. I don't know how much of the image I've missed. You're always going to have proper coverage anyway in the conventional ratio for cinema. But yeah, if you're into IMAX or you've got an IMAX near you, go and see it because Christopher Nolan always does IMAX very, very well. The sound's fantastic. It's not the most dazzling films to look at sometimes, but there are some moments where Hoyt van Hoytma's cinematography really comes through, especially in those more scientific elements where you'll see those slow motion explosions or the Trinity test, and it really zooms on those like plumes of fire. You've seen fire in slow mo before, but it's the awe and the majesty of what has been created, but also the devastating power behind it, and ultimately you know where it's leading to, and where the next target's going to be, and where the scenes like where they're deliberating on which Japanese country to drop the bomb on. It's absolutely sickening, but we know that stuff goes on. Lord, the mind boggles as to what goes on behind closed doors in all of these political landscapes, and we'll never know the half of it. We'll never know the truth. But yeah, good film. Fantastic film. Glad I went to the cinema. It felt like an actual movie. As I said, packed house. I really wasn't expecting it for this film. I know Christopher Nolan's, has definitely got his fans and people show up for his films. But I thought, right, the same week as Barbie, Oppenheimer, it's an intense 3-hour biopic about the guy who made the atom bomb. Are people going to show up for this? But it was a real mixed bag of ages in there. I did see there was a couple in front of me, actually. You could tell that his missus was just not into it at all. She was kind of fidgety. She was kind of sleeping or resting her head on his arm the whole way through, just really seemingly not interested in what was going on. But you couldn't hear a sound, the whole audience. I don't think there was a free seat, actually. Certainly not in my row. I had when I booked, there was one seat left on its own, almost like it was meant to be. And I was like, right, I'll go for that one. I always go for middle row, as close to the middle as I possibly can. But everyone was just swept up in the film. You weren't even conscious of people around you, really. It was just, you were hanging on everything. So I think people liked it. And from what I've seen so far, reviews have been really, really good so far for this. People praising the performances, the screenplay, the score, the visuals. So it'll be interesting to see how well this one does. I think the fact that it was done on a budget of 100 mil is really going to do well for this film. So far, it looks like it's got box offices at 10.5 mil, but I don't know if that's taken into consideration everywhere else. I don't think it is. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing how this one does. I think Barbie is going to have a tremendous opening weekend, or maybe first couple of opening weekends, and then I think it's just going to absolutely crash, because I know there was some people saying that Barbie might make $1 billion. I really hope it doesn't, but hey, at my local Odeon, they were going all out for Barbie. The whole place was decked out in pink. All the staff members were wearing pink and sort of beach clothing. Not as in not as in bikinis and stuff, but they were wearing like the shades and flip flops and carried around like inflatable props and stuff like that. So yeah, they were going all out for Barbie at Odeon Cinema. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to round it off there, because when it's a good film, it's really difficult to talk about. I much prefer the videos, unfortunately, where I'm ranting about something, because at least I've got something to talk about then, or get heated about. But yeah, this is a solid movie. I'd absolutely recommend. I mean, Christ alive, what else is out at the moment? So go and see it. New Christopher Nolan movie. Just go and see it for a good film, for a good cinema going experience. That'll do it for me tonight. I've got to get myself to bed right now, because I'm up early for work again tomorrow. So thank you to... I see that one person is watching right now. I don't know who that is, but whether you're watching this after the fact or you come back and, catch up with this, yeah, I always appreciate your guys' viewership. And I'm actually trying to think what the next film is. Is there anything big out? As I mentioned, if you want to see me rant about the Barbie movie, I'll try and go and see that this weekend. I'm absolutely dreading it, though, and I actually really don't want to go and see that now. Let me just see real quick before I round off if there's any big film coming out next week that I don't know about. No, it looks like it's just that and Barbie for the next week. I've mentioned before, but I've got some cool films booked for August, some nice rescreenings. I've got Enter the Dragon, I've got South Park the movie, Bigger, Longer and Uncut, I've got 2001 A Space Odyssey, so all of those films I'm really looking forward to seeing on the big screen. But yeah, we're just kind of in the middle of summer movie season now, so let's see what other terrors await us this summer. But this one was really good. This one was worth going to see. So if you've got a spare 3 hours, check out Oppenheimer. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and until the next video, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. I'm actually going to see how... I need to leave it for a few seconds now, because usually I hit end stream and the video just cuts off. So I'm just going to leave it a little bit. So this is for me. I've got to watch this video back. So I'm going to chill. We're going to chill for like another 10, 20 seconds. I feel like I'm on a TV show where they just wave at the camera. So imagine there's like a whole bunch of credits going up right now. Give it 10 more seconds. Okay, that should do it. Good night.